Could Mahito use Idle Transfiguration to give himself the six eyes? Let's talk about it. All right, first of all, shout out to the captain himself, Luffy, who asked me this and a couple of other questions. And in my opinion, yes, I think a full potential Mahito could conceivably change the shape of his own soul to give him the six eyes. So let's talk about why. And first and foremost, we know that Mahito can literally change his appearance to suit whatever he needs, right? He can morph his soul into anything. And we've seen him use this so many times throughout the series, not only on himself, but on other people, right? And considering he can turn his arm into all of these things, why wouldn't he be able to emulate the biological properties of the six eyes? Because remember, the six eyes are not a curse technique, they are biological physiology. So if he could do this, why didn't he? Is he an idiot? And no, I think there's two main roadblocks that prevented Mahito from doing this, which is why I said a full potential Mahito, like a Mahito that got to learn and develop for another, 10 to 20 years. He would be able to do it. And that's because the two main roadblocks are one, Mahito's understanding of like biology and human physiology and cursed energy would need to deepen, right? Mahito obviously can't transform into something that he himself cannot conceive because that's just illogical, right? And I don't think Mahito knew, maybe he knew of the six eyes, but clearly he didn't have an understanding of them in order to emulate them. So he would need to deepen his knowledge in probably a few different realms in order to emulate this. But then the second thing that he would have to get across is the whole destiny and potential binding vows that surround the six eyes. Because we know that the six eyes are connected by fate to both Tengen and the Star Plasma Vessel, and that no two six eyes users can appear at the same time. So whatever that is behind that destiny, behind that fate, whether it is binding vows or not, I think is a powerful force within the world. Meaning, even if Mahito understood biology enough to emulate the six eyes, he wouldn't be able to do it if Gojo or say another six eyes user was currently alive. But if they weren't, then we would have this demon running around the streets. And Mahito, I already made a video on full potential Mahito, and we didn't even talk about this possibility. But if we're going to give him the six eyes on top of it, just good night, right? Because his one weakness for most people is him running out of cursed energy. And he would never do that if he had the six eyes. And so now let's take a look at the next part of Luffy's question, which was, would this full potential Mahito be able to change or even give people curse techniques? And again, I think so, because that would just be a matter of changing the shape of their soul to then change their brain to have a curse technique etched on it, right? And I think that's within the realm of what Idle Transfiguration has been shown to do. Again, it's just Mahito not having the depth of knowledge to perform a feat like that. But if we give him 10, 20 years, again, to study cursed energy, to understand how that works, then I think he could do it. And before anybody brings up what happened to Junpei and then also what Kenjaku did to enact the Culling Games, they weren't literally giving people curse techniques. What Mahito was doing was changing the shape of their soul to give them bodies that could actually use the curse technique. So he didn't give Junpei that curse technique. Junpei was born with that jellyfish curse technique. He just was also born with a body in such a way that he couldn't actually use it. Now, why or how or what exactly was hindering him, we don't know, but that's what Mahito changed. He didn't quite literally give him the technique. But again, I think a full potential Mahito would be capable of something like that. And then Luffy asked, if Yuta had copied Mahito's technique, could he have reversed what Mahito did to the transfigured humans? And conceivably, yes. If Okotsu had Idle Transfiguration, then he would be able to change the shape of a transfigured human soul back to its normal form. But I do think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because Yuta would have to know what the original shape of that person's soul was. So unless just by virtue of having Idle Transfiguration, you gain some awareness of like the original shape of people's souls, then it would be impossible for him to do so, right? Like, because if we just bring up a random stranger and it's like, hey, Mahito turned this guy into a snail, can you fix him? It's like, well, I don't know who that guy was or what he used to look like, so how could I feasibly turn him back? But if he did, then he has the capability to do so. So, if it was like Maki or Yuji that had their arm blown up by Mahito, then he could probably do that pretty easily because he's familiar with them. But again, you know, unless he just somehow knows the original shapes of people's souls, he wouldn't know what the blueprint was to return them to, if that makes sense. And then while we're on all of this soul talk, I actually got another question on this subject from Panda. But before we dive into it, I need to give a spoiler warning for any of my anime onlys. But Panda says, since we know that inanimate objects have souls in JJK, could we have theoretically swapped a living being with an inanimate object? And unfortunately, no, as hilarious of an idea as that would be. Like, can you imagine him just running in and swapping Sukuna with a lamp and then GG, it's over? But we know that this isn't possible because when we was explaining his technique, he mentioned that you need the consent of the person in order to swap the contents of their soul. So, you know, you can't really get consent from a lamp, but maybe it would work if just the person in the equation agreed, but I would imagine you would need consent from both parties. Which also leads into your next question of what if we had just swapped Yuji and Megami in the midst of that final battle in an attempt to put Sukuna back in Yuji, aka a prison for him, right? And I think that this gets complicated with whose consent you would actually need here, right? Because technically both Sukuna and Megami's souls are in one body. So if you're just swapping Yuji and Megami, and one, we would need Megami to consent to it, and he had largely given up for the majority of that battle, right? Then what would that do, right? Would that just put Yuji, that would put Yuji in Megami's body with Sukuna. So is the presence of Yuji's soul enough to be a prison for Sukuna, or do you need both Yuji's soul and the body, or do you just need the body? You know, we don't really have the answer to that question. And then if it's a matter of swapping Sukuna, you would obviously need his consent, which he probably wasn't going to give. Anyways, that's going to do it for this one, y'all. Again, shout out to Luffy and Panda. Thank you guys so much, and thank you for watching.